So I've been on the fence about this, but I think we need to cover this Nintendo leak. Now, on May the 3rd, there was a massive leak of Nintendo source code, all sorts of stuff that went on, and I'm going to talk about the leak because I've had so many DMs, emails, requests asking me to cover it, and initially I was kind of on the fence about it, but I think we need to cover it. So let's get into it. We're going to discuss the leak, what it is, what it isn't, what it could mean for stuff like emulation, FPGA, system on a chips, Nintendo 64 devices, and more. So this leak all started a couple of weeks ago in 4chan when there was some Nintendo related leaks that happened with some old Pokemon debug ROMs and source code, and then there was 3DS debug ROMs, and then the keys to the consoles all the way up to the DSi was leaked as well, which is a pretty massive thing. And then the biggest thing that occurred, the full source code, design, documentation, pretty much everything you need to reconstruct a Nintendo Wii was leaked and made available. Okay, so how did this leak occur? Well, the company that Nintendo contracted to do the hardware and the SDK work over many years is known as Broadon Route Free. So when the iQue project began, the iQue is the Nintendo 64 player that came out only in China. Nintendo gave Broadon the SDK and the Verilog, which is the hardware definition language source for the Nintendo 64 hardware, so then they could design their custom iQue player around the Nintendo 64 architecture. So when they went to make the hardware for the iQue based off the Verilog, they used a Red Hat Linux toolchain, and the iQue company in China used it to localize actually making the games. Now, Broadon was hacked, and the CVS repo was uploaded to 4chan. So what is a CVS repo? Well, essentially it's just a source code repository. So someone had hacked the Broadon server, got access to the CVS server, and basically just dumped the entire contents, uploaded it to 4chan. And I believe it's like a 2 gigabyte file which extracts out to something a lot larger than that. So I'm going to talk about the biggest discoveries that have been found to date. The first thing is on the Nintendo Wii is the source code for the Boot 0, 1, and 2. Now these are the early stage bootloaders that you find on the Nintendo Wii inside the Hollywood chip. So when you turn on the Nintendo Wii, the bootloaders will run Boot 0, then 1 and 2. So we've got the entire source code for these 3 bootloaders. Now this was something that Nintendo hid away from the kind of prying eyes of hackers for many years. No one really knew where these bootloaders were coming from, and then it was found out later by the Fail Overflow team that there was code that was running inside the Hollywood chip. So all of a sudden now we've got the full source code for these bootloaders, which is absolutely astounding to me. And then there was the SD boot, which is a customized boot 2, which allows data to be loaded from SD card, which is something that Nintendo was kind of experimenting with. And it's also retail signed. So we've got the full source code to that as well. And then things get even crazier because you've got the operating system, when you boot into the Wii, the home menu, which is known as iOS, and that's not to be confused with Apple's iOS. And to be fair, Nintendo did take the name iOS first, but the entire source code for iOS is also leaked. So technically someone could customize iOS, add features to it, maybe add an FTP server to it natively, or maybe provide an option to do pretty much anything. It's crazy, maybe add native widescreen support to it, or just whatever features you can think of could potentially be added to iOS. And then there's also the SDK to develop iOS apps is also available. But then let's move on to the source code that was found for the DVD drive and the XE interface. The XE interface is the external interface bus that was found on the GameCube and the Wii. And this is for like the memory cards that were found on the GameCube. So we've got the source code for that as well. But this is where things get really crazy. Now we've got the block diagrams, the data sheets for every single component, and the Verilog for the entire Nintendo Wii. So for those people that don't know, Verilog is the hardware description language, or HDL, which is used to design digital circuits. So everything, including, the Broadway and Hollywood chips, which were shrouded in mystery for years when the Wii came out, is leaked and available. So now, like I said before, you can reconstruct, in theory, a Nintendo Wii and basically bootleg the whole design and maybe put it on a system on a chip or FPGA. So this is absolutely huge. And then there's the massive dump of GameCube internal documentation, the physical layouts of the DVD drive and the DVD discs, which is very interesting because, for years people were trying to understand the DVD copy protection on the GameCube. And for those people that don't know, it's quite sophisticated. There is these kind of notches that are physically kind of inserted into the GameCube disc. So all that information is now kind of understood as well, and it's all been leaked. And then there's the dump of the iQue, which was the Chinese-only system that was based on the Nintendo 64 that was never cracked to allow N64 games to run. All the games were actually ported specifically for the iQue, and there is a copy protection method in place now. So what does all this mean? Will this help things like emulation? Will we see an analog FPGA Nintendo 64? What about a bootleg or a system on a chip Wii? The answer is probably no. So anyone that's in emulation is not going to touch any of these leaks. The problem with doing something like that is you're basically admitting to Nintendo that you're using your Nintendo's proprietary custom code to get a more accurate emulation experience. And as soon as Nintendo understands and gets a whiff of, let's say, Dolphin utilizing any of the leaked code, they're essentially going to shut that entire project down because then they have the legal authority to do so. So the Dolphin emulation team has already made a statement saying that they are not interested in the leaks. They're not even looking at it, and that's the right thing to do. But there's also the hardware side. What about the hardware, the Verilog designs? What about maybe reconstructing the Nintendo 64 or the Nintendo Wii and FPGA and maybe coming out with like an analog, N64 and analog Nintendo Wii? Well, the same rules apply. I mean, anyone that is a hardware manufacturer or a software manufacturer that's trying to keep above board is not going to use these leaks. But here's the thing. There isn't really any way to prove that these documents haven't been glanced at or maybe read through to, correct a couple of mistakes, maybe increase the accuracy of some routines that have never run very well. And I think that's the part where a lot of emulation developers and emulators out there potentially may use this information as a reference guide to get a better understanding about how things are done. And I guess the other thing to mention is something like Dolphin is open source, which means that someone could just branch that code and then use Nintendo's proprietary code to increase the emulation performance or the accuracy of the emulator. And then that would then allow Nintendo to go after that individual. And because it's the Dolphin name, does that mean then the Dolphin core group of people are involved in that lawsuit? That's a really difficult question. I'm not an attorney, but I think there's a lot of things there to consider as well. Now, the other thing is the Verilog files. Can you construct an FPGA Wii core right now? Well, I don't know if there's anything powerful enough right now from an FPGA perspective to do that. Now, I'm not a hardware expert, so anyone out there that knows more about this than me, please let me know in the comments below. But I don't believe you can actually reconstruct a Nintendo Wii in FPGA right now because there's really nothing powerful enough. Now, the other thing I want to mention is there are some other things that have occurred over the last few days that are unrelated to this leak, but are also part of kind of this Nintendo thing that's going on right now. And the first one is Super Mario 64 running on the PC at 4K with widescreen mode enabled. This is not a part of the leak in any fashion. This has to do with the recompilation project that's been going on for quite some time now. But essentially what's happened is someone has managed to recompile or compile Super Mario 64 utilizing DirectX 12 API calls and getting it to run on a PC natively without emulation. So this is unrelated to any of the leaks that we've been talking about to date. And the second thing is, recently it was also discovered that Donkey Kong Racing Adventure, which was a game that was pitched by Climax for Nintendo, had also been leaked on the internet that was running on the original Xbox. This was not part of this massive Nintendo leak, but it was something that has also appeared in the last few days. Now, I will mention that Donkey Kong Racing Adventure by Climax was something that has been around for a while. This is not really new information. In fact, if you look at Andrew Borman, he did a video on this back in 2016 outlining the game, the pitch that Climax did with Nintendo and Rare, and ultimately it didn't really go anywhere. But this is also very interesting to see this crop up as well. But I do want to stress that Donkey Kong Racing Adventure is not part of this leak that was found with Nintendo. And finally, because this leak is so massive, there's literally new information that is being uncovered pretty much every single day. So I expect to hear more juicy information coming out of this leak. And if there is something worth discussing in a follow-up, I'll definitely come back and revisit this topic for you guys. So there are my thoughts on the massive Nintendo leak that occurred on May the 3rd. Nintendo will respond to this, guys. Make no mistake, it's just a matter of time of how and when and what they do. But this is probably the biggest leak in the history of video games, at least something that I can remember. And I'm very interested to see how this will play out. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. As always, if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.